At age 7, the boy was taken from his mother. Not by force. By law. In Sparta, this was not considered cruel. It was considered the greatest gift a family could give their son, because what happened next would turn him into something most human beings never become. The Agoge, the most demanding physical and psychological training program in the ancient world. And unlike the myths, unlike the movies, we actually know what it looked like, because Greek historians documented it in extraordinary detail. This is what it actually was. When a Spartan boy entered the Agoge at age 7, his old life ended completely. He left his home, his bed, his family. He was placed into a unit called a bua, a herd, with other boys his age. They would live, train, eat, sleep, and compete together for the next 13 years. The first lesson was not combat. It was discomfort. Boys were given a single garment, one thin cloak, for the entire year. No shoes. No mattress. They slept on rushes they cut from the riverbank with their bare hands. In winter, they added thistle down to the rushes for warmth. That was the only concession to cold. The goal was deliberate. A body that cannot tolerate discomfort cannot function in war. And Sparta was always preparing for war. Their diet was calculated to keep them hungry. The primary meal was a black broth, a soup made from pork blood, vinegar, and salt. Visiting dignitaries from other Greek cities who tasted it reportedly said they finally understood why Spartans did not fear death. Because nothing could be worse than the food. But this was intentional. Hungry boys became resourceful boys. They were permitted, expected, to steal food. If caught, they were punished. Not for stealing. For being caught. Because a warrior who gets caught is a warrior who gets killed. There is a famous account of a Spartan boy who stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. The fox began eating through his stomach. The boy said nothing. He stood at attention. He died rather than reveal the theft. Whether true or legend, this story was told across Sparta for generations. Because it captured exactly what the Agoge was designed to produce, a human being whose will was stronger than their pain. The physical training was relentless and varied. Running, enormous distances, daily, barefoot across rough terrain. Wrestling, without rules. Weapons training. Swimming in cold rivers. The boys competed against each other constantly. Competitions were not friendly. Injuries were expected. Weakness was punished socially. Boys who performed poorly were mocked, excluded, given less food. There was no such thing as rest day culture in the Agoge. At age 12, the training intensified. Boys entered a phase where older teenagers were deliberately set against them in combat drills. The older boys were encouraged to push hard. The younger ones were expected to hold their ground or improve quickly. This system meant that every boy was always being tested just above his current limit. Modern sports science has a name for this: progressive overload through competition. Sparta developed it as a system 2,500 years ago. At age 18, Spartan boys entered the most extreme phase of their training, the Krypteia. For 1 year, they were sent out alone into the Spartan countryside with nothing but a knife and a cloak. They had to survive entirely by their own means. They moved only at night. They were explicitly permitted, and expected, to kill. This was the graduation test of the Agoge. Survive a year alone in the dark. Come back harder than you left. By age 20, a Spartan man was a full warrior. But here is what most people do not know. The training did not stop at 20. Spartan men continued physical training every single day until age 60. Not as a hobby. Not as maintenance. As a professional obligation. A Spartan male's entire identity was his physical capacity. To stop training was to stop being Spartan. What did that daily training look like for adult warriors? Running. Wrestling. Discus and javelin. Weapons sparring. Swimming. Hunting. The Spartans also practiced a war dance called the Pyrrhic, a full-body movement system performed in armor that trained agility, coordination, and combat movement simultaneously. And here is the fact that surprises most people. Spartan women trained too. While women in Athens were largely confined to domestic roles, Spartan women ran, wrestled, threw the javelin, and participated in athletic competitions. Spartan society believed strong women produced stronger children. They were right. Research in epigenetics now confirms that maternal fitness levels affect offspring development in measurable ways. Sparta knew this empirically 2,500 years before the science existed to explain it. So what does modern science actually say about the Agoge system? The cold exposure, sleeping outside year-round, swimming in cold rivers, activates brown adipose tissue and increases norepinephrine production. Modern cold exposure protocols like deliberate cold water immersion produce measurable improvements in mental resilience and metabolic efficiency. The Spartans ran this protocol for 13 years of childhood. The barefoot running on rough terrain built foot and ankle strength that modern athletes spend years trying to reconstruct. Research on populations that never wore shoes consistently shows superior proprioception and lower rates of lower leg injury. The deliberate hunger created a hormonal environment, elevated growth hormone, heightened cortisol response, that modern fasting protocols attempt to recreate. The Spartans did not fast by choice. They fasted by design. The constant competition, the social pressure, the public accountability, these created psychological conditions that researchers now link to peak performance states. The Agoge was not just physical training. It was a 13-year nervous system recalibration. Here is what is most astonishing about all of this. The Spartans did not have sports science. They had no concept of hormones, no understanding of neuroplasticity, no knowledge of brown fat activation or proprioceptive training. They had only